Hey guys, Jared Lintner here with Tackle Warehouse. We're here in the late fall, early winter transition, and the fish can be kind of difficult to track down. They're constantly moving, a lot of different factors this time of year. So I'm going to go through some tips and techniques on what I do to put more fish in the boat this time of year. No matter where you're at in the country, you know, the late fall, winter transition varies, right? I mean, in Florida, it's going to be a different weather climate than we have in California, and the same thing, you know, up north, down south. What you're looking for is those temperature drops, and then when the lake kind of stabilizes. Like in the fall time of year, the water temp's constantly going to drop, and what that's going to do is that bait fish, you know, is run to the back of the creeks, the pockets and stuff like that. Now they're going to want to filter back out and get more into those wintering type areas. So, you know, it's a great big range of, you know, water temperatures and conditions. What I generally look for is, like I mentioned, I want a constant kind of, you know, if that water temp's been dropping all throughout the fall, and then it kind of flattens out at like that 52 to 54 range, that's when I figure, you know, it's that late fall, early winter transition. The fish are kind of scattered, and that's what makes them kind of difficult to pinpoint, is because they kind of get off the shad or alewives, whatever kind of bait fish they're feeding on, and they'll start transitioning into eating crawfish style baits. So it's kind of a confusing time of year. I have 4 baits here. I have a Buzzbait, a Lipless crankbait, a regular crankbait, and a jig. Those are kind of my go-to setups for fishing the late fall, early winter transition. And so we're gonna get more specific on those baits as we go along. All right, so some of the key areas I mentioned, you know, on any given body of water is gonna be those places outside of those creeks or a pocket or things where they were at during the fall time of year where the shad are piled up. So what you're looking for is, I would say, hard structure. Soft structure is stuff like grass, pads, any kind of aquatic vegetation. A lot of fish are suspended. Now they're seeking out like hard targets like rocks, wood, stumps, you know, whatever's given in that area of the country you're fishing. A big key thing is finding a channel swing. Those fish are coming out of those pockets, those flats, you know, creek channels, and they were gonna naturally wanna follow those creek channel bends. So on their way to their actual wintering holes, meaning a deep point, a rock ledge that goes from say 10 to 25, 30 foot, they're gonna use those channel swings as stopping points. So some of the baits that I have a lot of confidence in over the years are laying out right here. And first, this is one of my favorites by far. It's a big double buzz. Big profile bait. I generally throw a big trailer on it. Like right here, I got a bigger oversized swim bait on it. It's just a big profile bait. And those fish, a lot of times, you're not gonna get a lot of bites usually, but they're gonna be great big ones. Those fish are, you know, they'll be anywhere from 1 foot down to 15, 20 foot on some of those rock walls. So those fish that are in that upper third of the water column, I feel like I can attract them with this big double buzz. Like I said, the big profile on there, the big swim bait trailer. And another little topwater bait here is this here is a Jackall Pompadour. I mean, it's pretty unique. It attracts a lot of big bites. I generally like black in the Pompadour in the late fall, early winter. The same thing with a buzzbait. If I'm fishing clear water, I'm gonna go with a shad color here like I have. If not, I'm gonna go with a double, you know, bladed big buzzbait, black with black skirt. It seems to be a really good combination for me. You know, there's several available at Tackle Warehouse that mimic this. One key thing I do though, this time of year, a lot of the vegetation, like I said, is gone or is dissipated. What I'll do is I'll put on an oversized treble hook. I got a Trocard treble on there. You can use any kind of treble hook, like a #1 or a 2/0. You just put a little, you know, just like you would a keeper on your normal spinnerbait trailer hook. And that treble hook right there, those fish that are coming up slashing, you're gonna get a piece of them more times than not. So it's better than a single trailer, you know, and it's hard to throw in the grass. I hardly ever throw it around grass or emergent vegetation, but this time of year, you can get away with that, and it's gonna put more fish in the boat for you. So now I'm gonna go into my crankbaits. I got 2 different types of crankbaits, so I'm gonna go into that right now. All right, so in the fall, you know, if you've watched some vlogs I've done with Tackle Warehouse prior, Lipless crankbait has been my go-to. I mean, I love a lipless crankbait. Several styles, body shapes, colors available. Again, with the watercolor situation, I kind of let it dictate what colors I'm throwing, but predominantly, if I had to pick one or two anywhere in the country, I'm going with this natural kind of crawfish, kind of a bright belly on it, gets a lot of response. And it's kind of that time of year, like I mentioned, where they'll get off the shad, kind of get on that crawfish, and it's just a really good way to effectively cover a lot of water. You know, anything above a ½ ounce size. This here is 5/8 ounce. I got some 3/4 ounce ones, and I can fish it at a variety of depths, anywhere from, shoot, a foot down to 15, 20 feet, depending on your retrieve. You know, you can get real specific with it. As far as, you know, if you want to do a yo-yo technique, straight reel, there's several different applications for this. And again, you're focusing on those channel swings, hard cover. If your lake or body of water you're fishing doesn't have a channel swing, you want to seek out that hard cover next to deep water. That's a really, really big factor. So along with that, I have another, I'd say, crankbait series, and this here is just a medium diving crankbait. It goes anywhere from 7 to 10 foot. You know, I kind of like that rounded bill this time of year. It's got a real tight wobble. Usually when the water temp starts dropping, you don't want a crankbait with a real wide swing to it. You want something kind of tight, kind of more natural, and you could keep that bait in that strike zone a lot more than I would say lipless crankbait, just because with that you're retrieving it faster. This, you can slow crank it, you speed it up. It's going to keep that nice tight wobble. The colors, again, I went with the crawfish for the lakes that I'm fishing. Now, there's been times when I throw like a chartreuse shad or a ghost minnow for that matter. So it's kind of up to you to have a variety of colors in that medium diving section to figure out, you know, what kind of forage they're feeding on. Crawfish, shad, alewives, trout, hitch, I mean, sunfish. There's a lot of different factors that go into that, but keeping that bait in that strike zone and giving those fish an option, depending on the color you choose, is what's key to get those fish to bite. And as opposed to fishing in the fall, or I'd even get back up into summertime, a lot of times you're fishing way off the bank. With these baits right here, I'm talking about getting your boat pretty much parallel to the bank, making contact with the bottom, whether it's rock, wood, trees, laydowns, stumps. You want to make contact and get those fish to react to it. A lot of times the weather is, you know, if you had a real bad cold snap, those fish aren't going to want to really react to a bait. So keeping the bait in the strike zone is key, really key. And you know, not only with these, but with the buzzbait again, you have to fish that thing really slow and just barely keep those blades turning. Those big ones will come and get it. So last but not least, I'm going to go into a jig and a trailer that I have ultimate confidence in for the fall and winter times transition. So this here is a Eco Pro heavyweight tungsten football jig. This is a ½ ounce. I have them up to 3/4 ounce, and I'll fish in those same type of locations, those channel swings, those hard targets, anywhere from that, you know, 5 to 25, even out to 30 foot sometimes. Now, if I'm getting bit on my crankbait and they're slapping at it, or I feel like there's more fish in that area that just aren't chasing the reaction bait, that's when I'll turn around with the jig. It's that time of year, I keep mentioning it, where these fish are getting off the shad, they're getting on bluegill, they want to feed up. This has a lot more nutrients than a shad does. A crawfish has a lot more nutrients. Same thing with the bluegill. So they want a big meal, they want something they could sit on, they don't have to eat, you know, every 2 hours or something to be full. So that jig right there catches big ones, catches numbers. The colors I like, you know, is green pumpkin orange, that's a standard. A lot of your purples, you know, green pumpkin purple, your more kind of dark colors seem to work better than your natural, like lighter craws, more black and blues, like I mentioned, green pumpkin orange, green pumpkin reds. Those kind of colors seem to really be effective. This here I got from a buddy of mine, Terry Scroggins. I believe it's called a Big Show Craw, available at Tackle, I think. I told him not to bring him in, but he did. And I've caught a lot of fish on that. It's a really good trailer. Creates a bunch of movement in the water, but not so much. It doesn't have a lot of flappy action where you know, you're kind of wanting that bait to be more natural. Now, the other thing I'll do, I will say this, you can change your trailers, whether it be, you know, a brush hog or something like that, where you have a lot more appendages. This has the tentacles on here are gonna create a much slower fall. So if I feel like those fish, you know, don't want to react to something like that, or maybe I got short bit a couple times, with those appendages on there, it's going to slow down the rate of that fall and you're going to get more bites. So, you know, these 4 baits, anywhere I go in the country, late fall, early winter, I feel confident I'm going to get bit. It's on me to figure out the colors that they're wanting and the depths, and just really pay attention to your electronics to figure out, you know, where those channel swings are, where those deeper edges are, different transitions coming outside of those creeks and those pockets, and that's where you're gonna find those fish. All right, now that I talked about my baits, I'm gonna briefly go over how to fish them and the gear I use to fish them. So, you know, when you're throwing this big double buzz, it's really, really key, especially this time of year where, you know, that water temp's cold, you know, we're getting closer to winter, to fish it really, really slow. You're gonna make a long cast out there, and then what you wanna do is really kind of crawl it in. You don't wanna, you know, crank it like you would in the summer or even the spring for that matter. You really kind of wanna just make a long cast right up near the bank. Right, like I'm talking like as close as you can to the bank, and really just crawl it. Keep your rod tip kind of up and just let that bait do its work. Once in a while, like if I'm coming by a key piece of structure, like a corner of a dock or a stump, or a lay down, I'll kind of give that rod a little twitch, and a lot of times that's when those fish are going to bite it. The key with having that slow, you know, kind of making yourself slow down, is what I throw is a 6:3 to 1 gear ratio reel. So I don't have to think about, hey, you know, if I'm throwing a high gear ratio, slow it down, Jared, slow it down. It's naturally going to, you know, keep that bait moving at a slow pace. So this here is a Daiwa Tatula Elite, 6:3 to 1. Really smooth, you know, I mean, it's got everything you need to fish this bait effectively. Another key thing is braided line. Whether I'm throwing in open water, grass, it doesn't matter throughout the year. I'm always throwing a buzzbait or the Pompadour, that style of bait, on braid. One reason is because if you're fishing it right, the braided line is really never making contact with the water, so the fish ain't gonna see it to begin with. So, you know, and with the Pompadour, let me back up. So the Pompadour, some of my buddies have been like, dude, I can't get this thing to run right. And it's because they're overfishing it. They're fishing it way too fast. This bait is made for like I'd say a 6:3 to 1 or even slower gear ratio, where you throw it out, let it hit the water and just slow wind it. It's gonna do its thing. You don't have to implement action. It's not a stop and go or twitch bait. It's just a slow, steady wind is the best. And then the rod, last but not least, the rod, very important. Anywhere between a 7 to 7.5, I like throwing a heavy action. Again, you got braided line, you got bigger hooks, and when those fish bite it, I mean, they're coming to get it. You gotta have the power in the rod to get that fish away from the cover or what have you. Again, the braid's never touching the water, so you can get away with a heavier rod. These are heavier baits. You're not gonna have a hard time throwing them against the wind or into a little bit of chop or things like that. So 7 foot to 7'5", heavy action rod, 6:3 to 1 gear ratio reel, and always braid. So now we're going to talk about my crankbait setups. All right, so I'm pretty much targeting the same type of structure I did with the double buzz with these crankbaits. And how you want to fish them is you want to get that bait as close to the bank as possible. Again, these fish are wanting to be next to an object, whether it's a rock, stump, docks, something like that. They got off of suspending, now they're structure related. So you want that deflection, that's what causes those fish to bite. So, you know, earlier in the year, I'm taking this crankbait, you know, a different color, probably a shad, and I'm really winding it hard, just keeping it coming. With this time of year, I'm gonna make a cast, you know, and it's gonna hit the water, and I'm kind of just gonna feather it along the bank. I'm not gonna really overfish it. I just wanted to have that nice, steady kind of retrieve. And then if I feel something, like it gets behind a rock or a piece of wood or something, I'm gonna lift the rod up and it's gonna cause that bait to jump up over it. And 99% of the time, that's when those fish are gonna eat it. Along with that, you know, if I felt like I should have got a bite there, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just pause my reel handle So I'll be winding, and if I feel something, I'll let it pause for just a split second, then engage it again, and you're gonna get more bites doing that also. So just steady wind, anything different, either kind of finesse it over it, or let it pause once it gets past it, and you're gonna attract more fish. So the setup I use anywhere from a 7 to 7.5 foot composite action rod, glass action. The reason being is because you got treble hooks. The parabolic bend is why you want that glass kind of composite rod. That bend in that rod is what saves you from losing a lot of fish. A good gear ratio that I like to use is a 7-to-1, kind of a high gear ratio reel, just so I can slow it down if I need to, and I can speed it up. I can fish it at a medium. That 7-to-1 to gear ratio to me on this Daiwa Tatula Elite is like the perfect kind of speed for, just naturally throwing that crankbait, just winding it down a bank. That's kind of, I've thrown a lot of different gear ratios, and it seems to be the one that I get bit most often on. Now the line, for me, shoot, it's anywhere from 10 to 16 pound test. Generally speaking, anywhere in the country, I'm starting off with 12 pound. This here is a Crank FC. Any kind of fluorocarbon will really work. This is, like I mentioned, a Crank FC by Sunline. I like it because it has a tiny bit of stretch. It's real abrasive resistant, and it just casts and fishes really good. So there's that crankbait setup. Now for my lipless crankbait, this here is a TN70. The only thing I really do, along with the MC60, and what a guy should do really with all his crankbaits, is change out those stock hooks, especially if you fish that bait and the hooks are getting kind of dull. I mean, I kind of oversize my hooks, as you can tell right here. These are Trocar EWGs. It comes, I believe, with number 5s. I put on 2s on that front, just because, I just have a lot of confidence in them. I don't feel like it hinders the bait action. I don't feel like I get less bites. So I oversize that front hook, and it seems to work really well for me. When I'm fishing this bait, there's several different ways to retrieve this bait. So one is make a long cast, hits the water, and you're just kind of slow winding, and just kind of similar to the crankbait, the lipped crankbait, is you're kind of waiting for that bait to hit something to get it to deflect. My favorite way, especially when the water temp is cold, is what we call the yo-yo technique, or a lift technique. Make a long cast, especially if you know where an object is, or there's a little, on that channel swing, if you know where there's an isolated rock pile, or maybe a log, or a little ditch on that little channel swing. Throw it out, make a long cast, let it hit the bottom, and then you just kind of slowly lift, almost pump your rod up, follow it back down. When that bait's falling back down, doing that shimmering, a lot of times you can get those bites. So that's kind of a lift technique. Another way I've caught a few is just basically throwing it out and burning it in, getting those fish to react. That's only if, for me, I know there's I've beat on them for a while, I feel like there's more active fish. Maybe I could pick up a couple more by just throwing it out there and winding it as fast as I can. A lot of times you'll get those ones that are kind of leery of what's going down. But I throw the same rod setup, again with a 7 to 7.5 foot composite. For me, I like throwing the 7'7" ritual angling rod, just because I feel like, the longer rod, I can control fish better, I can cast further. But I throw a 7'2" rod a lot of the times also, like in the crankbait and with the lipless crankbait, in those tighter areas. Like if I'm fishing around docks or trees or something like that, where I need to get in and around those baits or those targets. So the gear ratio, I already mentioned that, same as my lip crankbait. So the only difference really is this here is 16 pound test Crank FC. 16 to 20 pound test this time of year for that lipless crankbait is going to get the job done. I recommend throwing any type of fluorocarbon. Monofilament, it's just, for me, it has too much stretch. So any kind of good fluorocarbon in that, I would even say 14 to 20 pound range, you're gonna be good with. Just let the watercolor dictate that. If it's really clean water, you might go to a 14. If it's super dirty, fishing a shallower channel swing, you can get away with 20. So now we're gonna go into the jig. All right, so last but not least, that brings me back to the jig. So, you know, in that same area, you know, I want a bait that has a slower, I can fish it slower. You know, these are all kind of reaction, fast moving baits. So the jig is more fine-tuned, like, okay, I fished the buzzbait, I fished the crankbaits, maybe down a stretch, and I noticed, you know, on my electronics that, oh man, there's a rock or a boulder, a stump, a laydown that's way out there offshore. Now I could go back through there with a jig and entice those fish that maybe didn't want to react to something. So basically how you're going to fish this is, you know, make that cast. It doesn't necessarily need to be right on the bank. However, I have caught some, and some great big ones in less than 5 foot of water on a jig this time of year. But ultimately, I'm fishing this bait anywhere from, I'd say 5 out to, shoot, as deep as 30 foot. So you're going to make that cast, a long cast, kind of keep your boat, you know, at a, I'd say a good cast off the bank. So you can, you know, kind of stitch the bank is what I call it. Like make 5 foot in between each cast, make those presentations so you can kind of dissect that creek channel, or, you know, that little secondary point, whatever it may be, and, you know, pick off those lazy fish, I guess. So you make that cast, you know, hits the bottom, and then what you want to do is kind of just drag it, and then when you feel something, just kind of ease it up over it. Don't, like, you know, in the summertime, you kind of want to get those fish to react by really hopping that rod. This time of year, you kind of just want to ease it up over it, crawl it, if you will, and that's when you're going to get those fish to bite. You know, a good rule of thumb is start out kind of slow. If you feel like you're not getting those fish to bite, you can see them on your electronics, you can see them on your live scope, and you feel like your bait's around them, then you do things to, you know, to entice those fish, whether it be, you know, snap that rod tip, make that jig jump a little bit, or maybe even kind of swim it, but really start out slow, and that's going to get those fish, like I mentioned, that's going to get those fish fired up, and you're going to get those fish to bite. You know, the kind of the gear that I like throwing, that I have a lot of confidence in, is a 7 foot to 7'5" medium heavy action rod, graphite rod, real sensitive rod. You got a lot of power. I'm generally throwing, like I mentioned earlier, anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 ounce this time of year, you know, in weight on the jig. So I don't need a heavy action rod. If I was throwing a 1 ounce or a 3/4 ounce to a, say, 1 1/4 ounce jig, I'd want a heavy action rod. This time of year, throwing these size of jigs, it's that medium heavy action is what you want. You know, the gear ratio, I'm throwing anywhere from, shoot, 7 to 1 to 8 to 1. 99% of the time it's 7 to 1 for me, just because it slows it down. So when I do make that cast, hits the bottom, and I reel it in, I'm not pulling that bait away from those fish. So 7 to 1 is really good. You set the hook, you got a lot of line pickup. The line, pound test line, minimum of 16-pound fluorocarbon. This here is shooter. It's got really good abrasive resistance, a lot of power, very minimal stretch, and that's what you want. Anything, you know, in the fluorocarbon line from 16 all the way up to 20-pound test is going to be what you want. So, you know, it's a different time of year. It's a great time of year to catch big ones. All these baits right here are going to get big bites and catch a lot of fish. So it's on you to kind of figure out the color, the forage they're biting on. Don't be afraid of the cold weather. Gear up with some nice apparel. Stay warm, stay dry, and using these techniques with these baits, you're going to put more fish in the boat. Good luck.